How's everyone doing today? Welcome back to another episode of Chasing Clarity Health and Fitness Podcast, episode 14, Physique Enhancement 101. And today we have a very, very special guest, Dr. Bill Campbell, joining us. But first, we're going to kind of get into how our last week has been. So, B, what's been new with you, my friend?
All right. Well, my week has been great, my friend. As I had mentioned on last week's show, I ended my mini cut phase last week, and then I had transitioned into a 7-day diet break, which is ironic because we have the diet break, professor himself on the podcast today. But essentially, I just took a 7-day diet break. I brought my calories back up to maintenance, and that was done with really the intention of dissipating some of the diet fatigue I'd accumulated. And then yesterday, I went back into the deficit to continue my photo shoot prep. So the diet break overall went really well. My weight actually dropped a bit despite the increase in calories, which is something that, I've seen in the trenches with clients, when I increase their calories during that week or 2 weeks that I'm running the diet break, which I exclusively do like personally through carbohydrate intake because it's allowing for better energy availability. So I generally see an upregulation of my NEAT levels. Like Jeff, you and I have spoken about this so many times that so I'm just putting more energy into the system. Like I talked about the high energy flux model. It just allows for greater NEAT levels, even unintentionally. So I noticed my step count was up a few thousand without me intentionally trying to go for more walks. I was just doing more things around the house, just more active. Energy levels were high. And I also dropped a good amount of water during this period, which I usually attribute to the fact that by increasing my carb intake, it helps to lower some of like the cortisol related water retention and fluid that I hold. Because for me and for many, dieting's a stress, whether we look at it, whether it's for a goal or not. But also this past week, honestly, I slept like a baby. So that was huge. And that also helped me shed some water weight. And then I wanted to follow up on something that I had mentioned in last week's podcast, because I received a lot of questions about, and since last episode went live, I just wanted to cover and just extrapolate on things a little bit more. And it was around the topic of how I like to begin my fat loss phases with a larger net deficit from the start of the fat loss phase. And I do that because that's when my body fat levels and my calorie intake are both higher. And then throughout the course of the fat loss phase, I'll slow down my rate of loss, once my body fat levels are lower and I've incurred more diet fatigue. And I had mentioned how the amount of fat we mobilize and burn for energy is dependent on the amount of body fat that we have stored on us. So, hence why we're able to lose more fat without risking as much muscle loss when we have more body fat on us at the start of a diet. And I had some questions from the audience about how much fat can we burn based off, our level of starting body fat. And when we talk about rates of fat loss and how much body fat we can actually liberate and burn, I've only seen one study that's actually looked at this, and it was a 2005 study by Alpert, where he analyzed the Minnesota semi-starvation study and theorized that we can lose about 31 calories per pound of body fat that we have. So say someone's 200 pounds and they're walking around at 20% body fat. They theoretically have 40 pounds of fat on them. So they could lose at a deficit of a little over 1,200 calories per day. So the max amount of fat that you could lose per day before tapping into the muscle would be around that 1,200 calories. So this would be a little bit over 2 pounds per week, according to his estimates. The only thing with this, I do want to put a caveat in, because I had looked at this study years ago and then I re-looked at it before I jumped on today, is he used the Minnesota semi-starvation study and he didn't go into detail about that. He just extrapolated his theories and his data upon that. And we have to realize that the Minnesota semi-starvation study, they use really aggressive deficits, but it wasn't an actual rapid fat loss study like we're going to cover with Dr. Campbell today. That was actually a 6-month intervention where their protein intake was low. They weren't resistance training. So they definitely lost a lot more lean body mass than we would have, had they went about things differently, had they been resistance training, had they used a high protein diet or done things in the manner that Dr. Campbell did in his most recent study. So, this was just something I wanted to cover because I did get a lot of questions around it. So regardless of like the limitations of the study, there does have to be a limit as to how much body fat we can lose while still preserving our muscle mass. However, as we'll cover in the rest of this podcast, we could probably lose more fat in a short amount of time than many would expect.
All right. Well, I appreciate you covering that up. I didn't get any questions about last week, so I felt like we nailed that one up. But my last 7 days have been super, super good. I'm meeting with the bank to go over Iron House 2 to get my ideas for what they want to do. I have to present like my idea about the auditorium and how I'm going to learn, utilize that to bring in fitness professionals to shoot their content, be able to bring in people such as Dr. Campbell to present things like that. So that's pretty cool. And otherwise, man, I just had a great weekend, hung out with Keegan all weekend. Him and I had a blast. He's actually bumped his food up a little bit more. Because
on the gaining train.
Yeah, he's serious about competing when he turns 13. He's like, I got a year and a half. And I'm like, all right, well, you'll do it. He started squatting everything, want to learn how to squat. So he's really taken the initiative on a lot of things. Last night, he did 17 pull-ups on his first set. Just,
damn, dude.
He's getting really into it, dude. So it's been cool to see. But otherwise, man, just the same old. Everything's been steady. Which I appreciate sometimes I think all y'all can agree when it just gets to be a steady flow, it's very nice and very easy. But I've been writing in my book. I'm almost at 55,000 words, but heading into Austin in the middle of August. So been pretty good with that. But Bill, my man, how's your last 7 days? How's your last week been? And then let's get into a little bit about who you are to introduce you to our audience. And then let's get cracking on this.
All right. Real quick, last 7 days, just been working a lot of university focused things. I'm an exercise science professor. So actually, let me just jump into who I am. I'm a professor. My last 7 days have been great. No complaints.
Allow me to introduce myself.
Yeah. Professor of exercise science at the University of South Florida, which is in Tampa, Florida. My original career was I went to school for marketing. And then when I got out of college, I actually was selling weed killer and bug killer. I always want to say bird killer, and I don't know why.
Bird killer. Yeah. Killing birds. All right. Probably would if you shot it on them. So
yeah. It's always like I have to stop and think, no, I didn't kill birds. I killed weeds and insects. So anyway, that's what I did. And I just loved bodybuilding. This is my early 20s. I did just one show in my life, but it was at that time. So again, I'm out there selling, weed killer. I could have cared less about killing weeds, but I just was so excited to go do my workouts, take creatine, or I just love supplements like vanadyl sulfate at the time. I mean, all the stuff that, at least a lot of the stuff had just no business working or wasting my money. But so I love supplements. I loved working out. I love dieting. So I just realized, man, I don't know if I want to spend the rest of my life killing weeds and learning about that. Let me do something in fitness. So I decided to go back to college with, again, no science classes. Eventually got a master's degree. Then I was like, okay, what do I want to do? I was thinking, do I want to work for a supplement company? Do I want to work in a corporate gym? And I'm thinking, I'm kind of nerdy. I like reading research. So I thought maybe I'll just try to make my impact through an academic career. And that's what I've done. I've been here 15 years. I'm very blessed by God to be able to do what I do. I love research. I love spending time with students. Yeah. And my research happens to be extremely focused on, I use the broad term physique enhancement, but it's really fat loss and trying to build muscle. It's bodybuilding, but it's for, I would say my research really serves people who want to look like bodybuilders, but they may not want to step on a stage. So bodybuilders are very extreme. So I learned from them. They're the experts in fat loss. And then essentially, I think that we just dial the things back a little bit to make it a little more sustainable. And that's the kind of stuff that I study.
I have a question for you. And this actually goes in line with our first question. What to you is the pillars of physique enhancement? Because you're in the trenches, you're studying it, you're teasing it out, you're finding what works, what actually doesn't work, which way to go. What to you are the pillars of physique enhancement?
So I always tell people, first of all, identify your goal. What's your goal? Because I think a lot of people, they think they have a goal and then they shortchange it. Now I'll give an example. There's 3 goals that you should set for yourself, either muscle building, fat loss, or I think I call it maintenance, but really that's a body recomposition phase. You're trying to build a little bit of muscle. You're trying to lose fat. And again, that's a hard thing to do. It can be done. So the first thing is just identify your goal. And once you identify that goal, go all in on that. So I've developed, just through all of my reading and all of my personal research on fat loss phases, the goal is fat loss. Let's be clear. Don't shortchange that by not dieting or living a life of a perpetual diet break, which is what I do, at least recently. So go all in on fat loss, but we also recognize we want to maintain the muscle mass that we have because it takes a lot of effort to build muscle. So we don't want to lose it. So let's just go with this. If the goal is fat loss, there are 3 principles of fat loss. And then we can also talk about the principles of muscle gain as well. But the first thing is, if again, we want to lose weight, but a warning is, and this is principle number 1, don't lose fat too fast. Because if you do that, if you're too aggressive in your dieting, guess what's going to happen? You're going to suppress your metabolism and you're going to lose muscle mass. When you lose muscle mass, when you suppress your metabolism, 2 things happen. You're making it much harder to continually lose body fat. And when your diet is over, you're like a magnet for body fat storage. So be careful. So there's the first principle. Now I will say, I've changed my mind and I now have some added context to that first principle. So don't lose fat too quick, but I have more context now, and I'm happy to talk about that and elaborate on that later. The second principle is do not decrease protein when dieting. Everything about a caloric deficit or dieting is catabolic, everything about it. So what are the things we can do to introduce some type of anabolic stimulus to the body when we're dieting? And there's really only 2 things. You lift weights, that's an anabolic stimulus to the body, and protein. Protein is an anabolic nutrient. So when you're going to reduce your calories, great, you should, if fat loss is the goal, but prioritize protein. And I would say for most people, you don't need to lower protein, lower carbs, lower fats. And then the last principle is one that I'm preaching to the choir on here in your audience, but I'll just say what it is. And then I'll say there are some people where they don't know this. Resistance train. If you resistance train when dieting, again, you're giving the body, the muscle, a stimulus to be maintained and potentially even grow. But the worst thing you can do when dieting is crash diet 1, cut your protein to real low levels, and never lift weights. You've just guaranteed that you're practically guaranteed that your diet will fail in the long run. 2, you're going to be a smaller version of yourself. I always have a hard time articulating this, but lifting weights is the only way to change your body shape. You're not going to run. And again, I don't want to hate running. Cardio is a great stimulus for fat loss, but if that's your mode for fat loss, you're not changing your body. You're just a smaller, squishy or spurt version of yourself. So those are my 3 principles for fat loss. Is there anything that you'd want me to elaborate on in more detail in any of them?
You said there was something you wanted to say, and then you just kept talking, and I can't remember because it was just a second ago, unless Brandon does.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So for years, I've had, I've kind of preached this list. Principle number 1 when trying to lose fat is don't lose weight or body fat too fast. Because if you're too fast, if you're too aggressive, you lose muscle mass. But where now I have to kind of add some context to my thinking is based on a study that we did last year. We have not published this yet. It's basically, I call it the rapid fat loss study. So what we did, we took resistance trained males and females who were already lean, and we gave them a diet that I think was too aggressive. And it was just under 40% of a caloric deficit. So to be specific, about 37.5% of a caloric deficit for 2 weeks. So for 14 days. And during those 14 days, again, because it was so aggressive, I'm like, they're going to lose muscle mass because that's what I believe. But what happened during the 14 days, and this was a surprise to me, they didn't lose muscle mass. They didn't lose lean mass. Now they lost weight, they lost body water, but when we adjusted for the losses of body water, they maintained their lean mass, or what we call their dry muscle mass, where you account for the body water losses. They maintained it very well. They did have a suppressed metabolism during those 2 weeks. So that's evidence to me this is a short-term success. So as I is I add context to this. If you want to start a diet, and I think we talked about this just earlier and what you've been doing for the last 2 weeks, I think there is a place for an aggressive and this is called an aggressive rate of fat loss early in a diet, as long as the length is not too long. And let's make sure protein is high. We had our subjects eat, I think it was 1 gram per pound of body weight of protein, or 2.2 grams per kg. They all continued their resistance training, and we tried to make that as intensely as possible. So 2 years ago, I would have said, don't be aggressive with your fat loss. Today, I would say, if you're going to be aggressive, I think you can do so and protect your muscle mass as long as it's not for an extended period of time. So there's the new context that I have.
All right. So yeah, so the caveat is short fat loss phases, we can get a little bit more aggressive. We can get a little bit more assertive. And that was actually, it's funny that we've aligned these podcasts in this order, because last week I covered that. I had done a mini cut phase, and then I had a photo shoot that was supposed to be coming up, and it actually got pushed back. So I went into a diet break, and now the deficit that I was previously using that was more aggressive because it was only a 3-week phase, I now have reduced that deficit. I'm using a much more moderate rate of loss and a much more conservative deficit for the rest of the 5 weeks that I will be dieting. So it's very similar to what you're saying. Yes, I realize that if I was to continue at that same rate of loss, first of all, I'd be more predisposed to muscle loss. I'd be more predisposed to metabolic adaptations. And there are a lot of drawbacks. So I would love to cover that with you in terms of why your philosophy previously was on slow rate of weight loss. Let's talk about some of the pros and cons of slow versus fast weight loss, because, obviously we have great results. When you look at, I believe you were referring to the fact that when you look at it, the results of your study that haven't come out yet, they lost lean body mass. But what we have to realize is lean body mass is not just composed of, a lot of people just associate that muscle. That's glycogen, that's electrolytes, that's fluid. There's so many other things within the context of lean body mass, where once you extrapolated that out, you realize there was pretty much no fat-free mass, or there was no dry fat-free mass, or no actual contractile tissue loss, which is a great advantage of doing 2 weeks. But say we were to extrapolate that out for 4, 6, 8, an elongated period of time, you're going to be more predisposed towards muscle loss and towards more of a suppression of their resting metabolic rate. So if we could just compare and contrast, so those in the audience know, hey, if you're doing, say, a 2-week mini cut or a 2-week rapid fat loss phase, you guys can go hard and aggressive. However, if you're going to do more of what we preach, which is more of a sustainable long-term fat loss approach, where you reinforce habits, you incorporate it into your lifestyle, what are the advantages of that?
Yeah, and I'll add just one other, I guess I'll call it just a thought that you have to grapple with. You can lose fat too slow as well. If you're just reducing your calories by 5 or 10%, there's this, I believe, again, I'm not aware of any studies, but theoretically, there's this sweet spot where you lower your calories and your hunger goes up. So the worst thing in the world would be lower your calories a little bit, but that's enough to trigger a big increase in your hunger. Now you've maximized the pain and minimized the positive effect. So ideally, you try to be as aggressive as you can, lowering calories, and have the lowest effect on your hunger levels. Now, again, I don't know where that is. I'm sure that's very individualized. So there's another context to this. And what we found in our study, and again, why did my mind change? Well, because every other study in lean people, and when I say every other study, like 5, but that's all that's out there. There's just very little research on lean people losing body fat, because nobody cares about lean people losing body fat except for bodybuilders. But in all of those studies, when they were aggressive in their dieting, they lost performance and they lost fat-free mass. Now, not all of them accounted for water. Some of them did. But I think we can safely assume they did lose some actual contractile muscle mass, especially if performance is also going down. But in those studies, the difference was they didn't prioritize protein. I mean, protein might not have been low, but it wasn't what we did, which was 1 gram per pound. So that's, quite standard in bodybuilding, but very high for your, what I would call a general population person. And then the other thing we did was we actually supervised their workouts until COVID. This was a COVID study, so that interrupted that about halfway through. So we know that the intensity was also high during this period of time. So yeah, as long as you're going to be aggressive with the protein, try to be aggressive with the effort or the intensity of your resistance training. You're kind of protecting that muscle mass in a short period of time. Again, in our case, it was 14 days and a near 40% caloric deficit. And the important thing here is too, these people were resistance trained. We had some women in this study who were less than 10% body fat. They were just kind of like one of those anomalies. They weren't even a bodybuilder or a bikini competitor figure. They were just lean. So they had very little fat to lose. So we had some very lean people in this study as well. It wasn't a typical research study where everybody's, BMI over 25 or even obese. These were lean, relatively lean people going into the study.
I think it's really important to hit on that because I find that your research is so applicable to our audience because these are, who we're speaking to are the same type of clients that we work with, which are lean individuals. They're trying to enhance their physiques, whether they're competitive or not. It could be lifestyle populations or competitors, because Jeff and I work with both. But also, most of the research that we have surrounding weight loss is done on overweight sedentary populations. And then a big differentiator, besides the fact you're using lean individuals, is that in most, all the dieting studies that I've seen from your lab, we generally don't see a loss in fat-free mass or in metabolic rate. If we look at the diet break study, at your 2-day refeed study, these individuals are not losing those components that we see in all the other, metabolic adaptation research. And the big differentiators seem to be a high protein intake, a very rigorous resistance training, and you guys are doing things in the most intelligent way. So, in my mindset, one of the main reasons we wanted to bring you on was because you utilize principles like the high protein diet, the intense resistance training that's monitored in the labs, which aim to maximize fat loss while maintaining muscle mass. And that's what we're all looking to do. So I think if we're going to learn from anyone in this field, it's you and the research that you put out.
Yeah, and I would add, just to give as much value to our audience as possible, what my lab has traditionally done in terms of a caloric deficit is a 25% caloric deficit. So what are your maintenance calories? If your maintenance calories are 2,000, if you diet on 1,500 calories, 25% less than that, we found that to kind of be a very good sweet spot for maximizing fat loss. And as you said, the outcome of our studies are almost always we maintain all of the fat-free mass, the lean mass in our studies. And I think, again, that 25%, it's not so aggressive that they're losing lean mass, and it's not so conservative that they're not experiencing fat loss. It's just in this one example, this rapid fat loss study, where we were more aggressive for a short period of time. But yeah, I think, so if somebody says, I don't know where to start, step one, figure out what your maintenance calories are. And what does that mean? How many calories can you eat and not gain weight and not lose weight? Once you know that, reduce by 25%, aim for a gram of protein per pound, and resistance train, you're probably going to be very successful in prioritizing fat from the body weight losses that you're experiencing.
Absolutely. No, I couldn't agree more, because if we look at, because some people are going to listen to this and say, well, they like to push things. We all have like these different pendulums, especially within the fitness industry. They're at one extreme or the other. They're going too slow with fat loss, or they're going too fast. And just to extrapolate on some of the stuff that Dr. Campbell has been speaking about, the reason that he's utilizing 2 weeks and he's not suggesting, hey, going any further, and the rest of his research is utilizing a more conservative or a more moderate rate of loss, is because in all the other studies that we have, we see many drawbacks of crash dieting. So we see in cases of like severe caloric restriction, AKA crash dieting, like we see in the Minnesota semi-starvation study that I cited before, that was a 50% caloric deficit for 6 months. And that ends up resulting in not only a large percentage of lean body mass and especially muscle mass loss, but we also see a significant body fat overshoot after that fat loss period occurs. And that's a phenomenon where you regain much more body fat after the diet than you lost during the diet itself, because you get this hyperphagic response, which is this massive increase in hunger due to having lost, and it's most closely tied to lean body mass loss. So this is something that, despite Dr. Campbell now having research on this rapid fat loss, it is just a short-term intervention. It isn't something that we would utilize long-term, because if you do extrapolate that out and do suppress your resting metabolic rate and do lose a large percentage of muscle mass, you will predispose yourself towards regaining fat and suppressing your metabolic rate and going through more of the consequences of, crash dieting. Because, Dr. Campbell can extrapolate on this, but there are inherent drawbacks. For every gimme, there's a gotcha. So with dieting, there are drawbacks. I mean, I'm sure you could extrapolate on the fact that we see, blunting of muscle protein synthesis. Once someone gets lean, blunting of muscle protein breakdown. There are a lot of inherent drawbacks to, caloric deficits.
Yeah, and it's funny, that Minnesota starvation experiment, the theory for many years, and again, we don't, that is an extreme case of dieting. I mean, these people lived in essentially a metabolic ward for months. But up until probably recent history, people assume that when you lose body fat, your body has this drive to put body fat back on until the point where you gain enough body fat that you had before you started the diet. I think it's called like the adipostat theory.
You're 100%
and
right.
What the Minnesota starvation trial kind of theorized, or what other people, again, using that data, what they theorized on that one, and some other military studies, was it's not really your body putting back on body fat that was lost that is important. It's more important. And let me just say, the thing here is hunger. When you lose body weight, hunger goes up. And the question is, once you stop dieting and you gain weight back, now the hunger starts to go away. And what you said was, in some cases, there's actually a fat overshoot where you're so hungry, you are, let's just say it, ravenous. Hyperphagia is a term we use. You're eating so much because you're so hungry after your diet that you're gaining significantly more body fat than what you started the diet with. Very bad situation. But what other researchers have theorized, and again, this seems to be, I would say this is more likely where the truth is, the key is to gain back muscle mass that you lost, not body fat. And if you can gain back muscle mass, that is what will keep your hunger down post-diet and prevent fat overshoot. Absolutely. So what my lab focuses on is, if we assume that that's true, well, let's from day one, let's protect muscle mass. Let's never lose it so we don't ever have to worry about getting it back. And again, we talked about this. I mean, it's not a hard concept. High protein and the stimulus of resistance exercise. Those are the secrets, the code, whatever you want to call it. Those are the variables that help prevent that. And again, it keeps your hunger down as well.
No, absolutely. So, a lot of the research that you're citing is actually by DeLu, had studied body fat overshooting. And essentially what he theorized was that we have a protein stat, not an adipostat or not a lipostat, like a lot of people thought. But, many people don't realize they take this crash dieting approach. They take this short-term approach because they want to lose. They're looking at scale weight, and they're not, they're really analogizing scale weight with body fat loss. And it's not. If you're losing at that high of a rate, you're going to lose muscle tissue, that metabolically active tissue in the process. And with that, when you get done with the diet, yes, you can regain lean body mass. However, it's so much easier in a caloric surplus to regain body fat than it is to regain muscle mass. And we see that just in terms of, say, let's look at rates of fat loss compared to rates of muscle gain. It takes such a far less period of time, such a shorter period of time, to lose a significant amount of fat than it does to gain a significant amount of muscle. And there's this theory, especially in the bodybuilding community, that there's an anabolic rebound post-diet. And I always tell my competitors, you have more of like an anabolic adipose rebound, in terms of you are more likely to rebound and regain fat tissue. Fat tissue is insulin sensitized. We often talk about one of the benefits of fat loss is that it increases insulin sensitivity, but it doesn't just do that at the level of the muscle. It does that at the level of the fat tissue as well, because fat cells have essentially shrunk during the process of fat loss. So now they're more likely, they're more adept to restore that lost energy in the form of fat and restore it and capture and hold on to it. So it's a really interesting, concept that I think, it's great that researchers like yourself, they put that out there and they really do educate the public about it. Like, listen, you can do things for short periods of time, but if you were to take my same rapid fat loss study structure and you were to, try to really elongate it to an 8 to 12 week diet, you could be predisposing yourself to more of the consequences of metabolic adaptation, as well as the muscle loss, the hyperphagic response, the extreme hunger, and ravenous appetite after, that's just going to predispose you to not be able to maintain the results that you got. And that's really what we have an issue with. Most people can lose fat, most people can lose weight. We have a body weight and a body fat maintenance problem after the diet.
Yeah, I'm hearing you talk and you're throwing out all these researchers. I think you should have been a professor and a researcher. you get in the weeds here.
Believe me, I'm very into it.
Yeah. And somebody told me that about, I don't know who it was. Somebody was talking about you and they're like,
probably man. Lauren.
It might've been Lauren. Yeah. Just like, that you were kind of a savant with your with your knowledge.
I appreciate that. I've been in the trenches a long time. I've been coaching 10 years, but I also like having, things that I've seen in the trenches. Like I mentioned with your refeed study, I was utilizing refeeds with clients since 2015, and it was just based off of my anecdotal experience, what I saw, the responses, what I saw with myself personally, and then also what I saw in the trenches with my competitors and with my lifestyle clients. And then, come around you and you do the same 2-day back-to-back refeeds on weekends and show a benefit to preservation of resting metabolic rate and muscle preservation. It was like, I finally have some proof. I finally have some data behind what I've been utilizing. And that's always great, because a lot of people, they'll poo-poo on bro science, but a lot of what you're studying is what we, high protein diets, 1 gram per pound. Now we have, by Morton, the 2018 meta-analysis on the confidence interval for protein being between 1.6 and 2.2. For years, bodybuilders said, let's eat 1 gram per pound. Well, we're right there for the max dose for, stimulate muscle protein synthesis. And now we have literature behind it. So it's really nice when, not everything that we found out in the trenches can really be applied, or should be applied, but it is nice when there is some research confirmation of things that we've seen work in the real world.
Yeah. And I want to add to that. Let's just pretend my study, the results were the rapid fat loss. There was, well, let me go back. My refeed study. Let's just say that there was no difference, that they didn't maintain their muscle mass any better, and they didn't keep their metabolic rates higher. Let's pretend that didn't happen. Again, that study's published. It's freely available if anybody wants to read it. A lot of people would then say, see, diet refeeds are worthless. And that's not a good interpretation at all. To me, it means there's no harm. And if your client would adhere better to that, then it's a huge win. Now, it just so happened that my study showed it was actually superior. That doesn't mean that would happen to every single person. It just means on average, the subjects in my study were able to maintain their muscle mass and their resting metabolic rate better. But just because something's not statistically significant doesn't mean that it's worthless or that there's no value in it. And I know people are very quick to, and usually they're quick to make that assumption or that point when it backs up their pre-existing point of view. Like I'll say something else. I used to think you had to eat 6 times per day, 6 protein feedings. I was wrong. I don't think that needs. I think it probably the most optimal is 3 to 5. If I had to guess, 4 is probably the perfect sweet spot. I used to think, don't ever go on a crash diet. And again, crash diet, I don't like that term, but don't ever be aggressive. Now I'd say, well, if you do it for a limited period of time and you keep protein high and you lift hard, I don't see any harm in it.
Yeah, I think oftentimes with research, sometimes people will take, and, I'll use an analogy. They'll throw out the baby with the bathwater. So for instance, we can review another study of yours, the diet break study. Now, it didn't show physiological benefits from the diet break standpoint in terms of any preservation of resting metabolic rate and muscle maintenance. However, there was a psychological effect. There was better adherence to the diet. There was, maybe better indices of hunger and appetite regulation. So we can't discard that, because I always like to say we cannot separate physiology from psychology. And when you work with real clients, you realize that the psychological side of dieting is just as important as the physiological side. So despite diet breaks might not, being shown as being, statistically significant as a better approach as compared to just linear dieting or just continuous caloric restriction, if it benefits the client from a psychological perspective, they feel less diet fatigue. They feel more, I just took a diet break because I wanted to dissipate dietary fatigue. I didn't need to do that. It wasn't going to, boost my metabolic rate or do anything of those type of things. It wasn't magic, but it really helped me get back into the zone so that this week I feel better in training. I feel less diet fatigue, less accumulated fatigue overall. My recovery is better. I'm getting better pumps in the gym. So there's all these other benefits that we often can't really see in the data, or we can't see in the research. And we have to realize that one study can only show us so much. And it's only, I believe there's only two to three studies on diet breaks, and there's only two in our populations, yours and Dr. Pios's. So it's something that we're going to still have to continue to research and see, maybe analyze different metrics, different, research and study different findings or different angles of it.
Yeah. And again, the literature better than anybody. You're talking about my study, and we haven't even published it yet. So the details from an abstract. But you're right. I'm only aware of 2 studies in resistance trained populations with diet breaks. Both of them, no benefit. You're not going to lose fat faster. You're not going to maintain muscle mass. So no physiological benefits, but I would also suggest no harm, absolutely no harm. But both studies found, and you alluded to this, I just want to I want to hammer this home because I think this is a huge finding. Both studies reported subjective psychological responses that were positive relative to hunger. In the other study, hunger was less in the diet break group over the course of a 12-week diet. They also had a lower desire to eat. So yeah, it's related to hunger. My study, we measured something called disinhibition, which basically means your likelihood to overeat in the presence of a stressful situation or in the presence of highly palatable foods. I think of like salt and vinegar potato chips for me, or chocolate chip cookies. So both studies picked up on hunger's probably going to be less, or the temptation or the likelihood that you're going to overeat. And to me, eventually a diet fails because you lose the hunger. Hunger usually wins. You can beat hunger today. You can beat hunger tomorrow. Hunger's ultimately, it's like death. Ultimately, hunger will beat you. And it seems like, based on 2 studies in our world, our peeps, diet breaks help with that. So that just means you're likely going to be able to adhere to a diet for longer and maybe not be as miserable. Does that mean that everybody's gonna have that in a diet break? No, but on average, statistically speaking, it is a significant improvement in feelings of hunger or the psychology of hunger.
And I think that's something that we should highlight, and also realize that that's a huge benefit, because underlying all these principles behind fat loss, we know that fat loss is a simple concept. It is inducing an energy deficit, burning more than you're consuming. However, it's a complex and complicated concept in application. So if we could just do something to bolster adherence, that underlies everything. It doesn't matter if you create a calorie deficit on one day, but if you can't induce a calorie deficit over the course of a week, over the course of a month, or consistently adhere to the deficit in which you're looking to create, or that you need to create to actually lose body fat, it's meaningless. So utilizing a diet break, if necessary, it could be something like you said. It does no harm. It didn't show in the literature when you did a head-to-head comparison that it had any deleterious effects or slowed down fat loss. They had the same rate of fat loss, same muscle mass preservation, same resting metabolic rate preservation. However, some better indices of appetite, hunger regulation, and disinhibition, which are wins in my book.
Yeah. It's funny. In just to elaborate on this, I think it was 2018. I went on a diet for almost the entire year. I said, hey, I got to a place where just physically I needed to lose body fat. So I'm going to do this. I think I set a goal. I wanted to lose like 10% of my body fat. And I didn't make this a scientific experiment. I wish I would have, but I have all my data, and I've actually posted about this. But what I did, I dieted all year, but every weekend I did a diet refeed. So I increased my calories back to maintenance. And then every 2 to 3 weeks, maybe every 4 weeks, I took a diet break. So out of like 9 months in a fat loss phase, I might have only been in a caloric deficit like 60% of that time. I was constantly, and I mean, the body fat, the weight loss, it was like clockwork. It worked. And my recollection of that, which I think this is usually the case. And again, I don't want to put bodybuilders into this, because bodybuilders do this at an extreme level. I think a lot of people fear the diet more than what the diet actually hurts them when they're doing. I know that's true for me. I've been avoiding dieting for myself for a while. And I know once I get into it, it'll be fine. I adjust. But man, just the thought, I'm like, well, you know, I have a Hooters gift card. I want to make sure I use that before I go through all of that stuff.
Awesome. Well, speaking of that, I would love for us to cover, who do you think rapid fat loss phases are appropriate for and who are they not suited for? Because like you're kind of saying, you know, sometimes even in your own life, it hasn't been the right time to diet. However, there is that advantage to doing something in a short spurt, like that 2-week diet break or that 2-week rapid fat loss period where momentum's high or motivation's high and you can take advantage of it. So in your opinion, based on your research, but also, you know, you've worked and consulted with many coaches, many athletes, you know, throughout the country, you know, who do you think rapid fat loss phases would be appropriate for and who do you think they would not be suited for?
I think they're appropriate for everybody, except for somebody who's already been dieting for an extended period of time. I would probably take that off the table. Now, again, if it's a bodybuilder and they have a competition date, they've already bought their flight, you got to do what you got to do. But other than that scenario, and you use the words that I love, when are you most motivated to diet? Well, usually when you started. So let's take advantage of that high level. If you fast forward anybody's motivation and desire to diet 6 months later, I can guarantee you it's going to be lower. So let's leverage that high motivation in the first week or two. And for lack of a better word, let's kind of kill them. I don't want to say that. Let's be very aggressive in that first week or two with all of the safeguards that we've already mentioned, high protein, intense resistance exercise. So if you look at it from that approach, it's a viable strategy for anybody who's starting a diet. As long as we agree on the front end, we're going to be very aggressive for the first 7 days or 2 weeks, whatever the coach client decides together. And then the beautiful thing about this is now when you increase the calories, but you're still dieting, it seems like, oh, this is great, but you're still in a deficit. If you would have started with that, you'd have been miserable. But now it's almost like a treat because you were so aggressive for a short period of time. So again, just the psychology of this. Now, I need to say this as a scientist. I'm basing all of this on my one study, all of my excitement, all of the rationale. But I do think it makes sense based on the data that we have and based on leveraging somebody's motivation and desire at the start of a diet.
You know, Dr. Campbell, I didn't even mean to lead you into this corner, into this, part of the podcast, but that's honestly what I was speaking about in the beginning of the podcast, because on the podcast last week and the week prior, I kind of, discussed my approach to dieting. And that's something that I take great, I take great responsibility in. I never want to put out anything that would influence anyone to take an approach that isn't appropriate for them. But I did put up the case that for myself, I'm an experienced dieter. I've been on stage 15 times. I've done over 100 photo shoots. I see that many take a slow and conservative approach to the beginning of dieting. So they start slow, but then because whether they have a photo shoot or contest prep, they push towards the end when they're most predisposed towards fat loss. And what I've just found with myself and with the hundreds of clients that I've worked with is that I like to be a little bit more aggressive at the start of a diet when motivation's highest, when body fat is highest, when they're in their most fed state. So they don't have any dietary fatigue yet. And this allows us to get some wins right off the bat. So they see progress, it fuels their motivation. And then, we start to slow down and we slow down the rate of loss based on their biofeedback so that we go from being at a fast rate of loss into a moderate rate of loss into a slow rate of loss. And by the end, we're technically in a smaller caloric deficit. We're still dieting. We're still losing body fat, but at a much slower rate than we were to begin with. But also that aligns with the fact that at those lower levels of body fat, at those lower calorie thresholds, we are more likely to induce muscle loss if we were to stay pushing at the same aggressive rate of loss that we started with. So that's why I like almost like a descending rate of loss pattern.
Yes. And I as I think of studies that my lab could do, that's one of the ideas that I want to have, kind of like this. Yes. Do it both ways. The traditional way is start small, maybe get more aggressive to hit my goal. I used to be a trainer, and a lot of my clients would go on cruises and they would get more and more aggressive closer to the cruise that they went on. And you talk about a situation from hell. What do you do on a cruise?
All you do is eat.
Yeah, and you don't move. I mean, unless you're committed and exerciser, there was some insane. I remember this was in my mid-20s when I was a trainer, and I worked with several. Most of them were females, and the whole cruise ship thing, lose weight to look good on the cruise. And then it was very eye-opening. I'm like, wow. Again, I didn't appreciate any of the fat overshoot science, but I saw it in real life. It made a big impression on me.
Yeah, I actually have a question for you. For studies, are you looking at doing any with like the gym population where they are basically maybe not heavily resistance trained? And I guess my question, to be clear, would you use rapid fat loss phases for perhaps the gym population? Because that is the one that is becoming quite the population most coaches are dealing with. That, they're becoming, they're sicker. They just don't feel good. They have a hard time hitting protein. There's a lot of variables there. So if in your advisement, would you be doing rapid fat loss phases with people of the gym pop background? Like, is there certain situations that you'd be like, hey, this is probably really appropriate? Like the person's like morbidly obese. Like, how would you define that if you're going to do it? You have any studies in the works down the line for something like that?
I would say, yeah, we just completed a study, and I'll elaborate on that one because I think it really ties into your question. But yeah, if I have just a person, I think I like an educated dieter. So I would want to take anybody and just get them familiar with food. So before I would do any type of fat loss or even rapid fat loss with a general population person, I would do this. And I'm just going to explain what our last study was. And this study that I'm going to talk about, I believe it was designed for coaches, for what you guys do when you work with general population people, because that was our subject goal. So we took non-trained females. And some of them were overweight, some of them were average, but they hadn't resistance trained, or at most they had 6 months. So 6 months or less, but most of them had never lifted weights or just weren't weightlifters. And what we had them do was, this was not a dieting study, by the way. This was more of a protein intake study. So let's just say I like to get people eating a gram per pound of protein. That's hard for general population people.
Yeah, they struggle with that a lot.
Very much. Yeah, bodybuilders, no problem. For me, as long as I have supplements, I can hit it no problem. If I had to get it all from food, though, I would struggle. I can only eat so much chicken breast and tuna in a day.
I think that's most everybody, man. Yeah,
we talk about this every week.
Yeah, every week we talk about this.
Yeah, so I'm very thankful that supplement companies exist to make that easier for me. So we took these non-resistance trained females and we said, you're going to be in 3 groups, and you're going to lift in my lab for 8 weeks, and we're going to supervise every workout. One group, we call it the control. We said, you just lift weights. Don't change your diet at all. The other group, we said, we're going to teach you how to track your macros. You're going to be our macro tracking group, and you're going to set a goal, or we're going to set a goal for you. And you're going to get a gram per pound of protein. That's your goal. And of course, we had to give them a bunch of supplements. When we watched them drink it after the workout, we took notes to help them get there. The third group, which this is the value of this design, was we told this third group, and I just call this the intuitive group. We said, hey, you need to increase your protein. If you want to change your body, we want you need to increase your protein. But instead of teaching you to track your macros, that's a skill. You have to learn how to do that. We want you to just simply identify the foods that you normally already eat that are high in protein, and simply double there. If you have 2 eggs for breakfast, have 4. If you have fish once per week, have it twice per week. If you have chicken breast on your salad, double that, or just add more chicken breast to your salad. So that was our approach. And we did this with this intention from a coaching perspective. If you have a general population client and you're asking them to start lifting weights, that's a huge lifestyle change.
Yeah.
And now we're going to say, oh yeah, and learn how to track your macros. And oh yeah, start taking all these supplements and make sure you get a gram of protein. And maybe we have to do that to get immediate results. But what if we could just say, let's just let you adapt to training and just you intuitively increase your protein. No pressure. You don't have to learn a skill other than let me help you identify what protein is in your diet. So we just finished that study a few months ago. We're in the process of analyzing the data. One thing I can tell you, we did present this, the protein group that we told to track, they actually got, I think it was 2 grams per kg. So instead of getting a gram per pound, it was like 0.9 grams per pound. So they got very close. The other group that we said just naturally double your protein intake, they got like, instead of getting 2 grams per kg, they only got 1.4, which was still above the natural, the control group, which was like 1. So doing it naturally, intuitively, without setting a goal, they were able to increase their protein. But my interpretation of our data was not enough. But again, that doesn't mean that we have to rush everything. I think I still like lift weights. Let's get you doing that for 2 or 3 months before we bring in the next habit. So let me tie all this back to what I would do with a general population. I would say if you can get a general population person, I would never start with a rapid fat loss diet. I would say you will lose fat without dieting at all. If you can do these 2 things, if you can lift weights once or twice per week, and if you can just increase protein, you will naturally not be as hungry. And again, when I say increase protein, well, even just that, even if they increase their calories, as long as it's in the form of protein, I believe they wouldn't gain fat. So that would be my first approach with a general population. I would say, if you want to go on a diet, there's 99 other coaches out of 100 that will go right there. I'm going to help you develop the habit of fitness, which is resistance training. You're going to see your body change. You might not see the scale change. Your body's going to change. And then we're going to support that stimulus with you just trying to identify and eat a little more protein. And then after some time, we're going to set some protein goals and you're going to track it, because I know that will help you get the optimal amounts of protein in your diet. So there would be my approach, which I would be a very poor coach because I wouldn't.
No, actually, dude, you're very much right, because, from where I own my gym, I have hundreds of people that will ask me, like, if I can do 2 things. I'm like, well, you're at the right place. And 2, you should get some protein powder, because those are the 2 biggest things. And then 3, if you got free time, get your steps up. And usually people come back to me a few weeks later, like, man, it's working. What do I do next? I'm like, all right, well, let's start looking at some other stuff, So that's really good approach, because what you're seeing right now in the fitness space is a lot of people who market to the people who are very advocate based, who are used to 25-day, 28-day quick fixes. And all it does is just leave them in a constant problem, because they don't know what to do when they get to day 29. And it's just
what happens on day 29. Fat overshoot happens on day 29.
Yeah, it is. So 100%.
Jeff, for your intermediate clients, say that you have lifestyle clients, because I have the same thing where they're intermediate, they're in the gym a few days per week, they've nailing their protein, but they have excess body fat. And that's where we can look to. We do have some research on like moderately trained individuals. So there's a study out of Stu Phillips' lab, Longlet et al., I believe it was 2016. They did a protein comparison study. And what I think a lot of people overlook are the actual body composition outcomes, because they always look at the protein percentage. They had one group eating 2.4 grams per kilogram, and one group, so a little bit over a gram per pound, and another group doing 1.2 grams per kilogram. In the low protein group, the 1.2 grams per kilogram, they lost body fat in 4 weeks, being at a 40% caloric deficit, and they maintained all their muscle. However, remember, these are, sedentary, guys with higher body fat percentages. They had been trained previously, but it was almost like they were detrained. In the high protein group, utilizing 2.4 grams per kilogram, they gained muscle and lost body fat in a 40% calorie deficit. So it's a perfect example. It was 4 weeks long, so a 28-day intervention, but they had them resistance training. They had them doing cardio. They had them hitting 12,000 steps per day. If you really look in the methods section, that's where you really got to dig into the study. And so they were combining a well-formulated plan. And then say you were to do it, you're an experienced coach, as am I. We would make sure that they have a reverse diet, or they have a transitionary period after the diet where we can get some quick wins. These individuals, in the course of 4 weeks, they gained some lean body mass, they lost body fat, and even in the low protein group, even those that maybe they couldn't get over 1 gram per pound, they still maintained all their muscle mass and lost body fat within the constraints of 4 weeks.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of cool stuff out there, as you've talked to me about before. And I think a lot of it is just finding out where the client really is through correct intake onboarding forms. And really, like, I have a phone call with every single client that I onboard, like to just chat with them to really understand who they are, what they're about, where they've been, and things like that. And the key question I always ask is, have you ever worked with a coach before? Majority of people say yes. And then when you find out, like, they'll give you an answer. And to them, like, it works. Rap is a coach, like an advocate person was a coach, or they had coaches who just sold them like these plans who they just execute on, then they just grind themselves to dust. So general population, that's why I wanted to ask that question, have a very interesting lens upon which they view quote unquote a coach or a trainer. And so that was really good to clear up. I appreciate that. And Brandon, you have to send me those links. But I want to move on to the next one. So we have caffeine's effects on fat loss and energy expenditure. I know that was B's question, so I'll let him pepper and bolt that one up a little bit before we get to the study on thermogenics.
Absolutely. So Dr. Campbell, just to give you a little bit of background, we do series at this podcast, at the Chasing Clarity podcast. So we've went through all the nuances of how to increase your metabolism, but really what we mean by that is your total daily energy expenditure. So we looked at it from, how does resistance training increase your resting metabolic rate and total daily energy expenditure? How does aerobic training? How does nutrition? How does the thermic effect of feeding? How does insulin sensitivity? And we have yet to touch on supplements. So I know you've done a lot of research within the supplement literature, because I spent 14 years working in the supplement industry, and I've read many of your papers. So I've utilized them as references. And I believe you were the president at one time of the ISSN, which I followed all their position stands. So I would love for you to just hit on some of the benefits of caffeine from a fat loss perspective and an increasing in energy expenditure, because we often hear about caffeine as, obviously an adenosine antagonist. It helps with, increasing energy. It could help at high level, high intakes to help with performance, but not as often do we hear about the impacts that it has on resting metabolic rate and energy expenditure.
Yeah. So I'm a huge proponent of caffeine for fat loss. Now, what does that mean? That means that the evidence is very clear that caffeine is a fat burning, fat loss. Well, let's just say fat burning and fat oxidizing. So actually burning fat. So ultimately fat loss supplement. Do I take caffeine when I diet? No. I know it's effective. I just don't want to rely on the supplement. That's not to say when I did my bodybuilding show, I took a lot of caffeine for that. So I don't use it. I like relying on exercise and dieting. And that's not to say I wouldn't use caffeine in the future for fat loss. I'm just saying my opinion on it is very favorable from the research. But in my own life, I choose not to use it because, again, I just want to be a little bit more. I don't know what I want to be. I want my diet and my exercise.
And rightfully so, because let's hit on the fact that I've worked in the supplement industry for 14 years. I just resigned from a position as a national sales director. And my whole adult life has been in the supplement industry. However, I've worked at Europa Sports, all these different great companies for sports nutrition, but I never hit on them on podcasts. So we didn't even do one. Reason being, what is a supplement? It's supplementing something in your diet. It is making up for something, but the foundation will always be nutrition and training.
Yeah. Yep. I agree. And let me say, I drink 1 or 2 Diet Dr. Peppers every day. So I'm getting some caffeine, whether I'm dieting or not. So I don't want to say that I don't actively avoid caffeine. I just don't take caffeine pills to lose extra body fat, even though I know that would help, or I believe it would help. So I like to look at metabolism across the spectrum. So total daily energy expenditure. What that is you have your resting energy expenditure. That's how many calories you burn while you're sleeping. And if you were just to lay down all day long, then you have 3 other components. You have your exercise energy expenditure. So how many calories are you burning during exercise? You have your NEAT. So when you're not resting and you're not exercising, your non-exercise energy expenditure, or some people call it non-NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So this is how much do you fidget, etc. And then the other one is your diet-induced thermogenesis. How many calories does your body burn when eating or digesting and absorbing those foods? So those are the 4 big components. The research on caffeine in terms of energy expenditure It's clearly increases 3 out of 4. It increases resting energy expenditure across the board. Remember, that's about 60 to 70% of the total calories that you burn in a day. So caffeine increases that. It increases exercise energy expenditure. It will, if you take it with food, it will increase the amount of calories you burn with food. The only one,
which I don't think a lot of people realize.
Yeah. And again, until I was focused on looking for that specific thing, I didn't know that. The only one that it's not clear that it helps is with NEAT, or your non-exercise energy expenditure. So as I sit here today, am I fidgeting more? I would say, based on my interpretation of the data, it doesn't seem to help with that one much. But the other thing that it does, caffeine is a nutrient partitioning agent. What does that mean? Let's say it causes us to burn an extra 100 calories throughout the day. Well, not only does it cause an extra 100 calories of burning, but it directs those extra 100 calories to come from fat stores. So nutrient partitioning, it's directing the extra calories to come from fat. And that's very evident with exercise energy expenditure. So exercise clearly burns calories. You not only burn more when you're taking caffeine, you're burning more from your fat and less from your carbohydrate stores. So as you start putting these, you start stacking these things up, that's why I believe it's probably the ideal fat loss supplement. In terms of, let me mention one more thing. Caffeine also has a mild appetite suppressant. So that's another thing. Again, if you're dieting, what are you trying to, what's the Goliath? Hunger. Caffeine, some research, it lowers it, sometimes it doesn't, but it never makes you more hungry. So you're now looking at caffeine as helping what we would call the energy intake side of the energy balance equation. It lowers your food intake a little, and it clearly helps the energy output side of the energy balance equation. You're burning more calories. So holistically, caffeine is a very powerful fat loss drug, supplement, whatever you want to call it. Again, I know this doesn't mean that you should go out and just start popping caffeine pills. I would suggest don't do that. Use it as needed would be my advice. In terms of fat loss, there's very little studies where they give caffeine to people for 2-3 months and they measure fat loss. There's a handful of studies, and it generally shows fat loss. Nothing like ephedrine back when they were studying it. Ephedrine was much more of a fat loss agent. So, but relying on just the acute short-term energy expenditure studies, it's clear that it increases that. It's clear that it directs the calories from fat stores. And we also know that it burns fat.
Absolutely. And I love that you hit on that, because a lot of people, we always think about fat loss as calories in, calories out, but there's actually 3 ways to lose body fat. It is increase energy expenditure, decrease energy intake, or improve nutrient partitioning. And the lipolytic aspect of caffeine, where it helps to liberate and mobilize fatty acids to be utilized as fuel, is one that a lot of people kind of neglect. They overlook that component, but that's helping to preferentially utilize fat as energy rather than taking it from other substrates. So I love that you hit on that. I appreciate you sharing that with us.
Hey, go ahead though. You go ahead and say what you got to say.
Just one more thing. There are some coaches that I respect in our space, and they kind of have a negative opinion of caffeine, that it will fry the dieter out. And I'm open to that. I have yet to find evidence that that's the case. But again, these are coaches that I respect in our space, that they would say, don't ever take caffeine. And I have yet to find a scientific reason. And something else that I've learned, you don't get caffeine. What's the word? There's no habituation of caffeine. If you take caffeine every day and you take it 3 years from now, you're still going to get a bump in resting energy expenditure. So your body doesn't get used to it, at least in terms of resting energy expenditure.
Yes, from its efficacy, but from the habituation standpoint of not feeling the effects as much. I think people conflate that. So they become caffeine tolerant, quote unquote, where they no longer get the same the adenosine activity from caffeine. So they notice, 200 milligrams used to light me on fire. I used to be able to get into the gym, and now I have to take, instead of 1 scoop of pre-workout, now I have to take 2. And that's a habituation aspect. But what you're hitting on is more so from the fact that, from a physiological perspective, we're still seeing the liberation of fatty acids, the increase in resting energy expenditure. We're getting all the benefits. We're just not getting as many of what some people would classify as side effects, some people would classify as like symptoms, or, the physical benefits that we feel from it.
Yes, that's a great way I like how you articulated that.
Appreciate it.
I like my morning coffee during my fasted cardio. So it just is what it is. But I have a question for you. Do you actually, I know that probably with what you do and so forth, you see a lot of things and you're probably like, hey, I wonder if I could do that too. Do you have like any supplements that you're bringing to market or anything like that you're looking to do?
No. That's an area. No, I've never even considered. I appreciate it. So, I mean, I know John Gorman has recently done that. Mm-hmm. I just look at that as that's so outside I don't think I would have the bandwidth to even do that. Now I've consulted from different companies on product formulation. So I've done that, but no, never really considered bringing a supplement to market.
Okay. And the last one, I think B wanted to touch on thermogenics, the new study of that, correct, B?
Yeah, just would love to hear. I know that I always like hearing a little bit in advance, so I'm sure that our audience would really appreciate any new studies that you have coming to the market. You did have on your protein study with the comparison groups, but also any other studies that you have in the works, just so people can get excited about following your journey and as well as following the study for when it does get published, then we know to look for it. Because just like with this rapid fat loss study, I reached out to you and I said, listen, I've been looking for this. I can't find it in the literature and it's yet to be published, but there's other people that will get excited about other studies. I do know that you have something in the works as far as a thermogenic study is concerned. So if you can give us any details, just anything you can share.
Yeah, so we're studying we're studying the effects of a thermogenic supplement on resting energy expenditure. Resting metabolic rate is what some people call it. The supplement is called Phoenix, and this is by Legion Athletics. And what I love about this is we're actually comparing a caffeinated version versus the same supplement without caffeine. So I love that. So that way I have the opinion that the only reason that any of these things work is because of caffeine. I don't have very much faith in the other ingredients. Now, in this case, a lot of the other ingredients in this Phoenix supplement, they're not meant to increase metabolic rate. They're meant to suppress hunger or have other aspects of that would help the dieter. So we're not studying those things. We're just studying the contribution that increasing your metabolism would have in the short term. And then we also have a placebo in the study. So we have 3 different supplements, one with caffeine and other ingredients, one with just the other ingredients with no caffeine, and then a placebo. And again, I just, for companies that actually invest in research, it's not cheap to do that. And the reality, I believe a lot of companies would just rather spend more money on marketing. So I do want to shout out Legion for supporting research on their fat loss supplement, because that's a big risk, because I'm publishing the results regardless of what we find.
I think we should hit on that. I think I've worked in the supplement industry for so long. I think a lot of people don't realize when you go to a university, it is not the supplement company that owns those results. It is the university. So it's publish or perish. It's getting published regardless if it supports your supplement or not, which is one of the reasons why we see so few companies actually invest into research that is done at a university. So, I got to give them accolades for that. I think that's something people don't know. And when they see supplement research, they say, oh, well, it was funded by the study. I hear that a lot about certain protein studies where they'll say, well, this university released it. And what a lot of people don't realize, hey, listen, that research was done and was going to be released, whether it was favorable for that specific company or not.
Yeah. And you make a good point. A university funded, there's plenty of labs that do research and that publish research that are not university affiliated. They're called CRAs, RC research, clinical CRAs, clinical research, something. I can't remember what it is. That's not to say that they are all nefarious. That is not the case. But look to see if a supplement study is published, look to see, is there a university affiliation with it? That generally means like exactly what you said. Or if it's not, is it one of these clinical research associations or affiliations, whatever that term is? And again, I apologize, it slipped in my mind. That's kind of important. Just real quick too, just to let people kind of peeling back the curtain a little bit, the money that they're spending on this, there's basically 3 areas where it's going. First of all, I don't get a penny out of it. I wish I did. I'm paying my research assistant. So I have my master's students, so they're getting paid to test all of these subjects. We're paying the subjects. The subjects have to be in I think it's 4 different days because they're taking every supplement about 4 hours per. So we're paying them.
So it's a crossover trial.
Yes, exactly. Yep.
Oh, very nice. So just so the audience knows, crossover trial, essentially each participant or each subject will go through each intervention. So they'll go through the placebo, they'll test the caffeine supplementation, and then they'll also test the non-caffeinated fat burner.
Yes. And then they come in another time at the beginning just to sign all the paperwork, ask questions. And then the other area is just supplies. Like we have to buy filters for the machine, oxygen sensors for the machine, tubes for the air. So that's, if people are wondering, well, where does all the money go? That's where all the money's going in this one. Subjects, my staff, and supplies.
Very interesting. Well, listen, Dr. Campbell, before we wrap up, we really want you to expand on, you have a new project. And I want to first off, on live, Jeff and I want to thank you for sending us an advanced copy of your new research publication, your new research review, which was phenomenal. For everyone out there, you guys know I'm a big research buff. I dove into it. Great 2 first articles. I'm not going to spoil them, but Dr. Campbell, can you elaborate on your newest project, something that you're bringing out to this industry that's going to be really helpful for both ourselves as coaches, but then also for our audience?
Yeah, so it's a research review and it's called Body by Science. For anybody who's not familiar with a research review, it's essentially a summary of relevant research for coaches. So if you work with clients, this is I would say it's, if you want to be a professional, you have to get this. Now, of course, I'm biased because I'm putting.
I agree 100%. And
no, I agree. It was great.
I want to agree and reinforce that because there's a lot of research reviews out there. I'm friends with Alan Aragon. We've had him on the show. We have Eric Helms coming on. There are many research reviews, but you really did it from the aspect of a coach and bring. I always like to say that my goal is to be able to bridge the gap between research and information and application. So practical application, you're doing that. You are showing us, hey, this is what the research dictates. This is what it shows. And then also what people in our field, what other coaches, respected coaches like Lauren and like Paul Revelia, who I'm friends with as well, what are their interpretation of the findings and how would they apply them to clients so that you guys out there can either apply them to yourselves or apply them with your clients.
Yeah. And on that note, you might see how an expert coach, let's just say let's say you're saying, hey, here's how I would apply this. That doesn't mean that you have to do this as another coach. That just says, oh, I didn't think about that. That's a good idea. Or, I don't like that for this reason. So it's all about just giving the coach tools to interpret the research. So again, my job, it's called Body by Science. My job is to break down the science in a very easy to understand fashion. If you do not have to know how to read a research article, in fact, don't, because it's really boring. Don't even try. Let me break it down for you. And then let the expert coaches that I'm bringing in help you apply it. So that's the goal. So you don't have to be like you. I mean, you actually probably enjoy reading research articles.
I do.
But most people either aren't going to take the time and they just don't have enough training to be able to do that. And that's what I do. The other thing that I would say is this is laser focused on fat loss and muscle building. I don't care about blood pressure. Not that I shouldn't say that. I care about blood pressure. I care about health, but I'm not going to talk about lowering cholesterol. I am laser focused on body composition. So diets, resistance training, sometimes supplements, breaks. So yeah. And the article, the first one that I sent you guys, I'm making that free to everybody. That's like the inaugural issue. That's the one that I had Lauren Conlon and Paul Revelia contribute to. So if you go to my website, it's billcampbellphd.com. You can go download you have to give me your email, and then you can download that inaugural issue for free. And that just lets you think, or just lets you see, yeah, this would be valuable. I think I'll buy the monthly subscription. Or if you don't find it valuable, great. Then then it's not for you. And I guess I can appreciate that. Although my mom would be sad if that were the case.
Believe me, guys, I think you're going to find, we already read through it and I think you'll find great value in it. So
yeah,
definitely check it out at least.
Yeah. Thank you guys for mentioning it. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Now, Dr. Campbell, when will this be going live? So you have the first edition up on your site. We can download it. We can get a copy of it for ourselves. But when will we, because I want to know for myself selfishly, when can I subscribe? When can our audience actually subscribe to your research review? And when will they be launched monthly?
So you can go to my website right now. I don't know how soon after this this will air, but it's
Friday.
Ready to go now. What's that?
Friday's
actually my launch day. So perfect.
Good. It'll be up when they hear it.
Yeah. And let me talk about cost. My goal is to put this in the hands of every fitness professional. A lofty goal, but I don't want to make this, I don't want cost to be prohibitive. So I'm starting, and again, I'm not going to keep it at the price, but I'm going to start it at $6.99 a month.
Wow.
And the middle of every month it will come out. You'll get, and I'm doing 2 reviews every month, plus, the expert contributions. So I do want to have some type of encouragement. Go to my website, get it now before I increase the price, because the price won't stay there. I guess I'm calling it a launch price, whatever you want to call it.
Absolutely.
But I want this to be my impact on the profession. And I think this is the way that I'm going to do this as a professional.
Wow. Well, Dr. Campbell, I have to compliment you on that, because I subscribe to all the research reviews. I do a lot of private mentorships and things of that sort, but that is a steal of a deal. If you had said $20, $30, like most of the research reviews, I would have paid it. So you would have had my money.
For you to be
support.
42.
Yeah. So we'll get a specialty price because you came on the podcast. We'll give you a little extra, but guys, you heard him out. He's done great. One of the main reasons that we wanted to bring him on here was so much of his research is applicable to you and I, to us as coaches, as well as individuals that want to, essentially enhance our physique and the constraints of a sustainable lifestyle. So for myself, I no longer compete, but I want to help my competitors. I want to make sure that I, am able to walk the walk, talk the talk. And guys like Dr. Bill Campbell are those that are in the trenches in terms of the research field, really reinforcing a lot of the things, the practices that we've, Jeff and I have utilized within our own coaching experience, and then putting some better evidence out there. Like, listen, you might be utilizing this method, but there might be superior methods, and he's the one testing them. So Dr. Campbell, thank you so much for being on. And also, I cannot wait. I will be subscribing Friday to your research review. So consider me one of the first to be on there. I'm very excited for it.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I thank you again for inviting me on and for letting me talk about what I love.
Bill, man, as always, I know it's second time for us hooking up, but it was great. You really imparted a lot of knowledge on our audience and a lot of things that will help. And I just want to resonate what Brandon's saying. What you sent to us, the 30 pages that it was very easy to digest and very easy to take away to be able to apply, especially if you're a coach looking to write content, because a lot of our job is content creation, and you're able to take that content based on studies where Bill and his team took it and broke it down in a very simple way. I like how you cleaned out a lot of the words in the research study that just make people go, I don't even know what that is. So I really appreciate that from that aspect. And, that's something that I'll encourage a lot of my clients to go get, because a lot of my clients like to learn into. And I think for that value, that's a steal. It's cheaper than OnlyFans. So you went the better route there as far as I'm concerned. So
my
OnlyFans
account did not do well.
I mean, I don't know. I think Brandon I don't know. Mine and Brandon would probably do pretty good, but
I'm trying to convince me, but I'm not willing to do it.
I'm willing to manage it, Brandon. But anyway, Bill, thank you so much for joining us. Where can everybody find you on socials, get a hold of you for anything like that real quick, and then we'll clean this up and wrap it up?
Yeah. On Instagram's the only place that I am at in social world. It's Bill Campbell, PhD.
You're probably better off for being that way.
Stay off the Twitter sphere.
Yeah, stay off the Twitter sphere. But Bill, thanks for joining us. I'm sure we're going to have you on in the future, especially when more of your studies get done. I know I would really like to do a deep dive on that 2 week on, 2 week off, and then some of the diet break stuff. I think that would be really, really cool to get in the weeds on.
We're definitely going to cover that topic, and refeeds.
Yeah, especially when you think about like preps and making them longer to get people ready with appropriate time, where they're not just looking like shoot up dog shit when they show on stage. So Definitely appreciate it. Awesome. Well, guys, you all have yourself a great day, and thanks for joining us again, Dr. Bill.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.